Hi, Shawn Ravenfire here, picking up where we left off with the arguments about God. The last episode ended with me getting off on a little rant there. And I'm getting a little bit of a dry mouth, a little bit hoarse. But we've still got plenty to go through, so let's go through them. The next argument is an argument for the existence of God, and this is mediums and prophets. And these usually don't follow so much the traditional God, more the non-traditional. Some person has a conversation with a spirit medium who tells them a whole bunch of stuff about quantum mechanics, because that's kind of popular nowadays. You know, tell us all kind of remarkable things. And the thing is, generally these prophets and these spirit mediums, they don't really receive any messages that are any different from the information that we have already. In fact, they seem to be less than what scientists have and more what is in the lines of common knowledge. How come no spirits ever told us about quantum mechanics before we knew about it? Why did they wait until it was common knowledge? And then why did they give us misinformation that is based on common misconceptions? Now, I'm not going to say that these spirit mediums and these prophets are necessarily lying, but if they're not, then the spirits talking to them are full of shit. And why not? Because after all, what is a spirit but the disembodied consciousness of a human being? And human beings are full of shit. So it makes sense that the spirit world would be full of entities that are also full of shit. So you can't really put as much stock in what they say as just as if it were a living person talking. I mean, why would I be more inclined to believe what a person tells me if they don't have a body than if they do have a body? There's really no reason. Next argument. An argument against the existence of God. Religions disagree. Why do religions disagree with each other? If they're all being taught by the same God, shouldn't they have all come to the same answers? Shouldn't they have all gotten the same message? Now, a lot of things they've gotten are the same. You know, love everybody, forgive everybody, give to the poor, yada, yada, yada. But the details seem to vary from location to location. Does that make them all wrong? I mean, if you tell me the Earth is round and then I jump up and say, no, it's a cube, does that mean the Earth doesn't have a shape? Because we don't agree on what the shape is? Maybe one of us is just an idiot, but the other one actually knows what he's talking about. That's something that has to be considered. Furthermore, if the details are not correct, that doesn't necessarily invalidate the concept. Take string theory, for example. There are 6 different string theories. 7 if you include 11-dimensional supergravity. Does this mean string theory has to be wrong or should be just dismissed just because there isn't one string theory? Maybe they're all correct in some way. Or maybe one of them is right and the other 5 are wrong. The point is, just because there are different string theories doesn't mean that there aren't strings. And likewise, just because there are different interpretations of religion, different perspectives on religion, doesn't mean that all religion must be wrong. Next argument. This is the most fucking annoying one ever. Yes, even more annoying than that atheist one I read in the last one. An argument against the existence of God. This is the one that atheists should have tattooed across their foreheads to save them the trouble of saying it every 5 seconds. The burden of proof is on the person making the positive claim. Fuck you. I have not heard an atheist go 5 seconds without saying this exact phrase. You know, the burden of proof is on the person making the positive claim. Another atheist enters the room. Did anybody mention yet that the burden of proof is on the person making the positive claim? And great claims require great proof. Okay, first of all, somebody's got to say this. Burden of proof. What burden of proof? Why is there a burden of proof? Are we in a courtroom? If we're in a courtroom, the burden of proof isn't on the positive claim, it's on the prosecution. If we're in a debate, any political debate, there is no burden of proof. The burden of proof is on whoever makes a stronger argument. It's just 51% to 49%. Or in a civil case. In a civil case, you only have to have 51% certainty. In a science lab, the burden of proof seems to be on whichever one is going against the grain. And in social situations, the burden of proof is on whoever has said the thing that's the most inconvenient for you personally. And do people ask for proof all the time? I mean, if I tell you I had a sandwich for lunch, are you going to ask me to prove it? Do I have the burden of proof? Like, I didn't really have a sandwich unless I could prove it? Of course, then again, maybe that's why so many people on Facebook these days are taking pictures of their lunch. What, we have to prove everything now? I actually saw a guy on the internet. Oh, the geniuses on the internet. Somebody said they saw a, I forget what it was, some celebrity they saw on a talk show, and somebody said, well, do you have a video link? And, well, no, I don't have a video link, I saw it on television. And the guy answered, well, since you're making the positive claim, the burden is on proof. Otherwise, you're just stating an opinion that you saw this show. Like, saying you saw a TV show is not an opinion, it's a fact. It's just maybe you don't believe the fact, but who's gonna lie about that? What, we have to prove that we watched TV? It's ridiculous. We don't have to prove every little thing. Most of the times that people say they believe in God, they're not saying it in a sense like I'm trying to scientifically convince you that there's a God. They're just making conversation like, I think there's a God. The same way as they might say, oh, I think it's going to rain. They're not trying to prove anything. They're just making conversation. Oh, I think this is a good sandwich. Oh, yeah, I think, I think there might be a Bigfoot. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think the Cowboys are going to win tomorrow. Yeah, that's what I think. You don't have to prove it. You're just guessing. You're just conversing. You're just saying what you think. Burden of proof. Okay, and we say great claims require great proof. No, they don't. Great claims. Okay, take politics, for example. They make great claims all the time. Claims that actually affect people's lives. This plan will stimulate the economy. That's a great claim, and a very important one. Do they prove it? Of course not, because they can't. They can't prove it. But they can't just not do anything. They can't just sit around and say, we can't do anything because we don't have scientific proof. How about this? Next time your significant other says to you, I love you, ask to see proof. Well, it's a great claim, isn't it? Telling somebody you love them is the greatest claim there is. That's a huge claim. You should say, well, can I see a sample of your brain tissue? I want to put your brain tissue under a microscope, examine its chemical structure to find out if the proper neurotransmitters are being released that are associated with romantic attraction. No, you pretty much base whether you believe them or not on two things. First, whether or not you want to believe them. And second, whether or not it looks like they're telling the truth. You're intuiting the answer. You're not looking for proof. You only look for proof when you don't want to believe something. And even if there was a burden of proof, even if there was, hypothetically, let's say there's a burden of proof. Let's say that people can't just agree to disagree. Let's say that the person making a claim has to prove it. Who's got the burden of proof? The person making the positive claim. Not always. Not always. Sometimes the person making the negative claim would have the burden of proof. If the claim is illogical, Let's say you're standing in a field. Two people standing in a field. Nothing around. No elephants. Nothing around them. One guy says, "There's an elephant." The other guy says, "There's no elephant." "Yeah, he is. He's right there." "Well, I don't see him." "Oh, well, you can't see him, but he's there." Who's got the burden of proof? The person making the positive claim, obviously. Okay. Same situation with one slight alteration. Two people standing in a field. There's an elephant. One guy, this time there really is an elephant. One guy points to the elephant and says, "There's an elephant over there." The other guy says, "There's no elephant there." "What do you mean?" "Well, it looks like there's an elephant there, but there isn't really." Who's got the burden of proof now? Is it still the person making the positive claim? No, now it's the person making the negative claim. The person who says that the elephant is not there, even though they can see it. So really, the burden of proof, if there is a burden of proof, is not on the person making the positive claim, it's on the person making the counterintuitive claim. It's making the not apparent claim, the person making the illogical claim. That's who's got the burden of proof. Now, I'm not saying that God is necessarily apparent, but it's a real oversimplification to just say all positive claims are false until proven true to some impossible level of scrutiny. That's ridiculous. I mean, that is huge confirmation bias right there. I mean, people will accept anything on less proof than the thing that, if they don't care if it's true or not. It's only the things that you actually don't want to be true where you're actually looking for this huge level of proof. You can't be certain of anything. I can't be certain that I'm here right now. Look at this. I say I'm here. That's a positive claim. I'm here. I can't prove it. I don't know if this is real. I can't prove with 100% certainty that I'm really here. Does that mean that I should assume that I'm not really here? Ridiculous. Next argument. Oh, here's a big one. This is an argument for the existence of God, and the argument goes something like this. Evolution doesn't really exist. And how do we know? Because it can't explain everything. There are holes in the theory of evolution. Okay, let's think about this. First of all, like I said in the anti-God argument, God and evolution are not mutually exclusive. Okay, if evolution is real, it doesn't mean that God isn't, and if evolution is not real, it doesn't mean that God is. Okay? Aristotle believed that the human race is just infinitely old. It was always here. It has no beginning and no end. If evolution turns out to be wrong, we'll probably default back to that position, not to creationism. Not that evolution is wrong, but let's just say, hypothetically, that it were. We don't default to the God argument. We could have been created by aliens, as the Raelians believe. We could have been manufactured in some kind of computer simulation. We could be a temporal paradox where our future descendants will one day go back in time and become our ancestors. You know, we could be, as a lot of existential New Age philosophers think, we could be just floating points of consciousness, creating the world around us with our imaginations. The point is, if evolution is wrong, it doesn't mean that the Bible is right. It means that the Bible is one of many infinite possibilities which have an equal chance of being right. But evolution cannot explain everything. Well, even if evolution cannot explain everything, which it pretty much does a good job of, but let's just say it didn't. That doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It just means it's imperfect. I mean, when we first came up with the idea that the Earth was revolving around the sun, we didn't know why it moved in elliptical patterns. We didn't even know that it moved in elliptical patterns. We thought it was circular. When we found out that was wrong, we didn't default back to the Earth is in the center. We just refined our position, said, oh, we got the angles wrong. They're elliptical orbits. We corrected. That's all. But it has often been said that by creationists that there are creaks in the ceiling and that there are holes in the theory of evolution, things that evolution cannot explain. Well, what are they specifically? For that, we're going to need a second hat. I have a lot of hats. So in this hat are several things that creationists want to know about evolution that seem to prove that it's wrong, but don't really. And I'm going to go through them one by one. Oh, I told you I wear many hats, both figuratively and literally. And the first problem with evolution is junk DNA and vestigial organs may yet serve a purpose. It's often said that junk DNA and vestigial organs, like the appendix, don't serve a purpose, but they might serve a purpose that we don't yet understand. Okay. They might. Or they might not. So just saying they might doesn't really provide a hole in evolution. I mean, just speculating that something might be wrong with it doesn't really, that's not really a hole. That's just a speculation. That's like saying, the Earth is round, but what if it's not? But it is. But what if it's not? Okay, what if it's not? That doesn't mean it's not. Doesn't work. You're just speculating on that one. Okay. Next up, the Cambrian explosion. A whole bunch of life forms appeared on Earth at pretty much the same time. Well, there's a reason for that. They were the first life forms. They didn't have any predators. And they didn't have to chase down their food because nothing else was alive. So they could basically just eat everything. And they reproduce by fission, which is very efficient. I mean, think about it. They're gonna multiply like crazy. Okay, there's a story about a king who was playing chess, and he said, I love this game of chess. I want to buy this chess set. And the peddler said, okay, put 1 grain of wheat on the first square, and then 2 on the second square, then 4, then 8, then 16, till you get to the 64th square. However much grain that is, that's what I'll take as payment. And the king said, you got a deal, because that's not much grain at all. Then he tried to figure it out, and it turned out it was more grain than has ever existed in the world. Exponential geometric growth. That's what caused the Cambrian explosion. It's just that cells, that single-celled organisms were just multiplying like crazy, and nothing was stopping them. Nothing was eating them, and they were just eating the organic matter around them. It wasn't organized into life forms yet. They could basically just eat the water for nutrients. Very easy to get a huge population growth under those circumstances. Very easy. Evolution is only a theory. Hear that one a lot. It's just a theory. Why couldn't intelligent design theory be correct? One theory is as good as another. Let me tell you something about scientists. They're a little funny with language. What we call a theory, they call a hypothesis, and what we call a law, they call a theory. They don't talk like the laymen talk. I don't know why. I don't know why they want to confuse the hell out of us. They used to say the law of gravity, then they change it. It's the theory of gravity now. Why? Aren't we sure if gravity exists? Well, yeah. We just call laws theories now. I don't get it. Why? But whatever the reason they call them theories, when scientists say theory, they mean law. And when scientists say hypothesis, they mean theory. What we laymen would call a theory. So really, when they say evolution is a theory, what they mean to say is evolution is a fact. It's a law. They're certain. The people who call it a theory are certain. And they're smarter than me, so that's good enough for me. The amoeba. Amoeba, handling. The amoeba was the first life form. Where did it come from? It's so complex. It's simple compared to us, but it's still too complex to just come out of nowhere. Okay. The amoeba is not the simplest life form in existence. It was not the first life form. The amoeba is actually very complex. There are simpler life forms. There is bacteria. There is mitochondria, free-floating mitochondria before it became part of animal cellular structures. There's viruses. There's, I don't know what else, a lot of simpler things. The point is that it didn't start with the amoeba. I don't know why we got into this habit of referring to the amoeba. I think it's just because we like the way the word sounds, of referring to the amoeba as something that is very simple in its structure, because it's not that simple. There are a lot simpler things out there. It didn't start with the amoeba. It started with free-floating RNA strands, and then DNA strands, and then, protein bubbles that form, and, chemical stews, and yada, yada, yada. If we were created by God, then we are beautiful and lovely and wonderful, and there is meaning to everything. And if we were evolved naturally from apes, then we're just a bunch of dirty animals. What's the big deal? First of all, if we're just animals, why is that bad? I like animals. Animals are cute. Some of them. Monkeys are cute. I wouldn't mind being related to a monkey. They're cute. They're funny. And why is coming from a monkey bad, but coming from dirt good? Oh, I didn't come from a monkey. That would make me terrible. I was made from dirt. That's wonderful. The hell's the... How do you come to that conclusion? Besides, isn't it really a matter of perspective, which is better? I mean, if we evolved naturally, we could say that we're the survivors, we're the strongest. We're the ones who made it through the hard times and grew beyond ourselves without any help at all. Think of it this way. There's two people. They both come up to you, and they're both very wealthy. One of them says, I was born into a rich family, and I didn't work at all, and I was given everything for free. The second person says, I was born poor, I had nothing, everything I am is self-made. Who are you going to have more respect for? Which is going to be a better story? The second guy, right? So why is evolution such a bad story, but creationism such a good story? It sounds to me that human beings are more impressive if we made ourselves than if we were made by someone else who gave us everything. But let's just say, hypothetically, for the sake of argument, that, yes, it's not a matter of opinion. Somehow, if we're animals, we're bad, and if we were created by God, we're good. Good doesn't make it true. I mean, just because something makes for a better... Just because you'd rather believe that we were created by God doesn't mean we were. I mean, I'd rather believe that I'm a billionaire. That doesn't mean I am one. Next supposed hole in evolution. All things are made similarly. The whole theory of evolution is based on the idea that one life form is very similar to another life form, but an architect would use the same designs over and over again anyway. This is actually a pretty good argument. An intelligent designer would repeat certain patterns. He would reuse certain themes. That makes a lot of sense. And this would be a serious flaw in evolution if evolution were only based on the similarity of animals. But that's not what it's based on. That's what got our attention in the first place. But we backed it up with microevolution, computer simulations, gradual progressions in bone structure in fossils, changes in DNA, similarities in junk DNA, which actually doesn't serve a purpose. These markers, and these are the things that we're really using to back it up. It's like, okay, the similarity of life forms, that's the thing that made us think maybe we evolved, but we found evidence to back it up. Since, I say we, I didn't actually find any evidence, scientists did, but people found evidence to back it up afterwards. That's what science does. We form an idea, we think maybe this, and then we test it. We look around, we say it kind of looks like something, but I don't really know. Then we test, and we determine if the test worked out. And in this case, the test worked out. There are no sudden changes. Evolution is a slow, gradual process. We all know that. We all know that it takes millions of years or whatever. But how come nobody ever sees a species change into another species suddenly, right before our eyes? Because we all know it's a slow, gradual change. Duh. I mean, that's like saying, you know, hey, I know the grass grows too slowly for me to see it, but how come it's not shooting up all of a sudden? Because it's growing too slowly for you to see. You just answered your own question. No sudden change. Why would there be a sudden change? Wouldn't make any sense. In fact, if I was in the zoo and I saw a gorilla turn into a human right in front of me, first of all, I'd shit my pants. Second of all, I wouldn't think, hey, that proves evolution is real. I would say, holy shit, some god just stepped in and transformed this animal. Thermodynamics. Everything decays into entropy, things become less complex. So how does evolution become more complex? Well, the second law of thermodynamics doesn't mean that things become less complex, it just means they become lower energy states. Sometimes the lower energy state has a higher structural complexity. Like take, for example, a water molecule. Hydrogen and oxygen by themselves, just free-floating atoms, are very simple, but they're high energy. Their electron shells are incomplete. When they combine into water, which is more complex, they move into a lower energy state, which is consistent with thermodynamics. So lower energy states and conversion to entropy can make things more complex. Sometimes, not always less. Sometimes they can appear to be more complex. Ah, here's one from the New Agers. Giants. Long ago, there were giants who roamed the earth. Giants who came from outer space. I did my own echo there. But giants who came from outer space, places like Mars. Yes, and the giants, and they're our real ancestors, not the apes. That's crazy. And supposedly there were people who found these skeletons of these giants. Where did the giants come from? Where did these giant skeletons come from that these people found that were our real ancestors, not the apes? Well, there's actually a very simple explanation, and I can tell you the answer, and it is commonly known. It was a hoax. That they didn't really find skeletons of giants. That was a hoax. Ah, this one. Charles Darwin admitted that he was wrong. Yes. See, everybody was a creationist, and then along came Charles Darwin, who said, there's no God, there's evolution. We came from apes, and there's no God. And then years later he said, I made a mistake. We were created by God all along. My bad. That's a bullshit story. That never happened. First of all, Charles Darwin was not the first person to suggest evolution. It was already a well-established theory. All that Charles Darwin did was propose natural selection, survival as the fittest as the mechanism, and we know that survival of the fittest is a real thing because we see it in business. You know, and it's we see it in free market economics. And as for this, and he was never explicitly an atheist. He, if anything, he was a deist. And he never said that he was wrong. He never recanted anything. And Darwin's theories aren't even the basis for our modern assumptions about evolution. They're basic. They were just a starting point. We've refined and revised his theories many times since then. I mean, we've improved on that. He's old news. Here are two arguments which seem to counterpoint each other. How could we evolve from apes if there are still apes? And how could we have evolved from a missing link if we don't see any missing links around? What do you want? You want the apes gone but the missing link's still here? Would that make you happy? First of all, the missing links aren't really missing. It's just an expression we use. The missing link comes from British scientists who were kind of going against the grain. The consensus was that evolution was a product of natural selection, as Darwin suggested, but then later some British scientists came up with this idea that evolution was not survival of the fittest, it was brain-fueled. That some ape was just so intelligent his body had to adapt to change to it, and it was ridiculous. And none of the other scientists in the world got on board with this. They thought it was stupid. And they were right. And those British scientists who came up with this idea turned out to be wrong. But they're the ones who coined the term missing link. And they were looking for a missing link, basically a monkey with a human brain. And they never found it. But the phrase missing link just became popularized, and it just caught on. And is now applied to any sort of in-between state of man and ape. They're not actually missing. We have skeletons. We can see these bones. Not a lot of them. There aren't a lot because, I mean, apes live in forested areas, and forests and jungles really aren't good for fossilization. The best fossils come from tar pits and, water, places that are underwater because there's a lot more sediment. You don't really get a lot of that in places that have a lot of wood, a lot of leaves, because everything decays in that area, so you don't get as many fossils, but you get some. Missing links are not missing. It's just, in fact, scientists don't even call them missing links. It's just laymen just got stuck with this word missing link as part of the vernacular and just never went away. And why do we still have apes? Because they don't need to adapt. They're comfortable. See, think about this. Let's say you got two people, and they're both kind of fat and out of shape, and they're sitting on the couch. One of them gets up, goes to the gym, and starts working out. And he starts exercising. And he gets in shape. He loses weight. He builds muscle. He's in much better shape now. And then somebody says, well, how could you have come from a fat, weak guy if there's still a fat, weak guy sitting on the couch? Well, because he didn't adapt. He didn't change. He was comfortable where he was. See, there was a climate change a long time ago. Forests, jungles, receding. Some of those apes stayed in the trees. Some of them were kind of nudged out. Didn't have enough room and had to adapt to the new environments. Live on the plains, had to walk upright. see over tall grasses. Those are the ancestors of humans. The apes, really, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That was their motto. Hey, these ape-like features are working pretty well, so they just stayed that way. They didn't need to evolve. We did. Yay us. So that's why we still have apes. There are very few transitional animals. We have a lot of fossils of animals that are established as a species, but very few borderline, very few in between. Well, the answer is simple. Because when we get comfortable in a particular species, we tend to stay that way for a really long time until there's a big climate shift. So it's really just during the climate changes that we're adapting. We're seeing some climate change now. We might see some new animals develop in the next couple of 100,000 years. So we're probably going to see some future person might find the in-between fossil of some new species, between some species that exist now and some that's going to exist in the future. But it's during the climate change. And usually these climate changes, what happens is it kills off a large portion of the population. It's only the ones who are more adapted to survive that they start to adapt, mutate, and breed. So there's actually a much smaller population during the transitional phase. So that's why there are so few transitional fossils. Because the transitional phase is when they're struggling to survive and there's not as many of them. When they're doing well, they'll reproduce like crazy and they'll be all over the place. The earliest creatures are unchanging. If everything's adapting, then why are there some species that have been around for so long and haven't changed? Well, again, what is the driving force behind evolution? Adapting to climate. Now, some species have to adapt to the other species around them. A gazelle has to get faster to escape from a cheetah. A cheetah has to get faster to catch up to the gazelle. But most of the time, I'll fall into a comfortable state, and the only thing that's really going to knock us forward is if there's some big climate shift. An asteroid collision, the beginning of an ice age, the end of an ice age, a volcanic eruption, a comet. Something that really changes the structure of the landscape. But the earliest creatures are sea creatures. The ocean doesn't change that much. You get down to the bottom of the ocean, it's not really going to be affected by ice ages or asteroid collisions or continental shifts. When you get down to the bottom of the ocean, the environment's pretty stable, so really, they don't need to adapt. They're already adapted to their environment, and they're going to stay that way for a really long time. So the earliest life forms really aren't going to change that much. There's a smaller piece of paper. The number of chromosomes. There could be mutations within a certain chromosome, but where does a whole other chromosome come from? Well, one could be lost, one could be added. Different chromosomes could combine. In fact, you look at a human and a chimpanzee, we don't have the same number of chromosomes, but we do have a lot of the same genes on those same chromosomes. See, it's like this. Imagine that this hat is a chromosome, and it's got a set of genes in it. And this is I think apes have more than, I think the chimps have more than we do. So let's say this is a chimp. This is a chimp chromosome, this is a chimp chromosome, they have a bunch of genes in them. We have one fewer chromosomes, so where do the genes go? They're combined into one chromosome. So that's all. It's not that there's a chromosome added or subtracted. It's just they're combined. It's just a matter of where they're broken. That's really all the difference is. Bananas. This one is so stupid, but it's so popular. Evolution. How does it explain a banana? Okay, first of all, if you're going to try to argue that we're not related to apes, you should probably not start by eating a banana. But the argument goes like this. Bananas are so easy to peel, God must have created them. Okay, now I could mount an argument about selective breeding by farmers, or the basic structure of fruit and how fruit adapts and must contain nutrients to fuel the seed, yada yada yada. I could go into all of this, but you know what? I'm just gonna say one word as my counterpoint. God must have created bananas because bananas are easy to peel. Here's my counter argument. Oranges. Oranges are a bitch to peel, and they taste better. If God wanted us to be able to peel bananas, why did he make the better fruit in the harder to peel fruit? If bananas tell us there's a God, then oranges tell us there's not one. Science tells us that if just one gene in the human being is changed or mutated, we will die instantly. So how could we have adapted from one species to another requiring several mutations? Well, one gene mutated would kill us instantly. I don't know where you heard that. I've heard this brought up several times. I don't know who made this up, but it's a lie. We have mutated genes all the time. Most of the time, a mutated gene is not going to do anything. And even if it does something, it's not going to kill us. It's just going to be something odd. No. Some guy with 12 fingers. I mean, that's a mutation. I mean, I went to school, I knew a kid who had like a flipper, sort of. Like it wasn't like a normal hand, it was like a flipper. That's a mutation. That is a mutation. You didn't die instantly. I don't know where you heard that. One mutated gene, you die instantly. You don't die instantly. That's made up. Which came first, the heart or blood? Heart serves no purpose without blood, and blood can't circulate without a heart, so which one evolved first? First of all, we're not Legos. Okay, we're not... Evolution doesn't put together a person or an animal a piece at a time. It's just less complex to more complex. Which came first? Blood. There's animals with open circulatory systems like clams and so forth. So yeah, heart came later, blood came first. And the two-chambered heart came first, then the three-chambered fart. The three-chambered fart came first. The three-chambered heart in amphibians, and the four-chambered heart in reptiles, which was then passed on to birds and mammals. If you're going to tell me that we can't survive without a heart, therefore there could never have been an ancestor who survived without a heart, look at a jellyfish. A jellyfish doesn't have any organs at all. It's just a blob, and it's alive. Now, if you remove a heart from a human, we're going to die. But that's because we got used to having it. Think about this. We used to get around in horse-drawn carriages. That's how we got around. Then cars came along. Now we get around in cars. We got rid of the hitching posts. We stopped having stores sell buggy whips. If all the cars disappeared now, we wouldn't be able to get around. We'd be stuck. Our whole society would collapse. Now, let's say that we didn't remember the horse and buggy, and somebody were to say, there could have never been a time before cars, because we need cars. If cars didn't exist, society would collapse. So therefore, we must have had cars from the very beginning of civilization. Well, no, because we had something else. Something less advanced, but we were able to survive without cars at one point. It's just now that we're used to cars that we can't live without them. And likewise, a simpler life form could exist without all these complex organs. Now that we're used to them, if you take out these organs, we're not adapted to survive without them anymore, so we'll die. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't have existed in a previous state where we could survive without these organs. And the jellyfish is proof of that. Because a jellyfish doesn't have a heart or a brain or a liver or a spleen, and they're okay. They're just less advanced. Another question about evolution. Eyes. The eye is so complex it couldn't have evolved all at once. And if dogs, there was ever a time when dogs didn't have eyes, how did they find their mates to breed? Again, we're not being put together a piece at a time. It's less advanced than more advanced. There was never a time when there was a dog without eyes. And even if there was a dog without eyes, why would you assume that it would be incapable of mating? Dogs find their way around by smell, mostly. You know, but you saying that you can't have sex if you're blind? Blind people have sex. Okay, it's not like they're gonna walk around bumping into walls like, oh, I can't find where the other person is. Like, they'll manage. But the eye, something so complex couldn't have appeared all at once. Well, no, there's animals with less complex eyes than us. Fish, crabs, insects. I saw a flatworm in high school in biology class. I was looking at flatworms. Their eyes were just these two dots that couldn't really see. They could just tell if he was moving toward light or away from light. That was really all they were good for. Brighter, darker. Couldn't really see images. That's a less complicated version of an eye. So yeah, the eye didn't evolve all at once. It evolved from a simpler eye to a more complex eye. Next argument, or next evolution question. Evolution assumes atheism to start. Basically, it goes like this. Let's just assume that God doesn't exist, and then figure out how we could have come into existence without God, and then use that to prove that God doesn't exist. Okay, I will agree that if that was your reasoning, it would be stupid. But scientists who figure out these theories aren't really assuming that God doesn't exist. They're not really assuming anything at all. They're just trying to figure out why things are the way they are. I mean, if I see footprints, and I say, oh, I wonder who made those, I'm not assuming that God doesn't exist to have snapped his fingers and made footprints appear without a person walking. I'm just looking at a clue, trying to draw a conclusion from it. And then when I find a conclusion, I'm not really backing it up with an atheistic argument. In fact, it's not really the scientists who are atheistic. It's the layperson who's interpreting scientific data without an education, who's assuming it basically proves atheism. The scientists really aren't making any claims about God one way or another. This is an old one. This is an old question about evolution. This goes back to the early days of the theory. About 100 years ago plus. Dinosaurs are more complex than lizards. If evolution is less complex things becoming more complex, then shouldn't lizards have lived a long time ago when dinosaurs live now as opposed to the other way around? Well, lizards aren't descended from dinosaurs. They're descended from other types of reptiles that were alive at the time, but you know, they're not the direct descendants from the dinosaurs. They're more like cousins than descendants. And besides, evolution doesn't make things more complex. They tend to get more complex, but the goal is to make them more adapted for survival in their environment. Now, if this means becoming more complex, as is often the case, then yes, they'll become more complex. But if becoming simpler would make them more adapted for survival, then that's the case. Like, like dolphins going from an animal with legs to an animal without legs. Actually, snakes. Snakes are descended from creatures that have legs. They're basically lizards that lost their legs. That is less complex. That is more complex becoming less complex just because it's easier for them to burrow in the ground. So yeah, it's not automatic that they have to become more and certainly not they have to get bigger. That's not necessary at all. Experiments with fruit flies. The idea is that some scientists were breeding fruit flies, trying to create a new species of fruit fly, and because they have shorter lifespans and breed faster, and they just created a new breed, not necessarily an entirely new species. They were still the same species, just an adapted version of it. Kind of like how a Chihuahua and a Great Dane are both dogs. So why didn't it create a new species? I don't know. Apparently, they just didn't stay at it long enough. Maybe if they'd stuck with it for another couple of hundred years, or a couple of thousand years, maybe they would have accomplished it. Maybe they would have accomplished a whole new species. But it's really not necessary that a new breed is going to become a new species while you're looking at it. Another question about evolution. How does evolution explain the existence of asteroids? Seriously, somebody actually asked this question. So somebody actually... How the heck? What does that have to do with anything? An asteroid is a rock. I'm guessing that somebody who didn't know how evolution worked tried to explain, oh, God didn't make everything, evolution made everything. And then some other person who also didn't understand how it worked went, everything? Well, that's something. Evolution made an asteroid? No, evolution didn't make everything. It just made complex life forms. It didn't make asteroids. Asteroids are rocks. Here's a good one. Somebody apparently found human and dinosaur bones in the same rock layer. How did that happen? Well, I don't know if this is a true story or not, but let's just say it is. We don't just date the age of fossils based on the rock layers. That's a good guideline, but it's not the only thing we use. Usually it's the radiocarbon decay that we use to, the levels of carbon-14 that we use to determine the age of something. The rock layers are really just a good way of approximating. But how do human and dinosaur bones end up in the same rock layer? Simple. Dinosaur bones could have been uncovered and recovered. Now you might think that sounds a little far-fetched. Not necessarily. I mean, we know that ancient people saw dinosaur bones. I mean, we have stories about dragons, which, by the way, why don't we just call them dragons? I mean, we say, oh, ancient people thought there were dragons because they saw dinosaur bones. Why don't we just back them up and say dinosaurs are dragons? I mean, it's pretty much the same animal, isn't it? We're just calling it a different name. It's like, people say, oh, people used to believe there was ether. Now we know there's no such thing as ether. But now we discovered the Higgs field, which is exactly like ether. So why don't we just call it ether? Anyway, let's say that I go to the Museum of Natural History in New York City. There's a big T-Rex skeleton. You remember the one from the movie? You see this big T-Rex skeleton, and I'm standing there looking at it, and I'm talking on my phone. I'm sitting here, and I got my little iPhone here, and I'm talking on my iPhone, and I look at the T-Rex skeleton, and all of a sudden there's an earthquake. And the T-Rex skeleton falls on me and kills me, and I'm lying here dead with an iPhone. And 1,000 years later, some archaeologist digs me up and goes, look, dinosaur bones and human bones in the same rock layer. Dinosaurs must have existed at the same time as iPhones. The point is that bones can be uncovered. In fact, there are people, there are Eskimos right now who have been finding and using woolly mammoth bones and woolly mammoth tusks that they found in fresh mud. Where did they come from? Well, some people looked into it and found there was a glacier that was melting, and there were mammoth bones and tusks falling out of the glaciers into the mud. Yeah, that can happen. So yeah, it is possible for dinosaur bones to be uncovered and then recovered. But you might think, okay, it's possible, but isn't that kind of a long shot? Not really, because most of the time, the dinosaur bones are way lower in the ground than the human bones. So if you find dinosaur bones and human bones in the same rock layer, it's such a rare occurrence that you would almost have to say this is an unusual circumstance. This was a rare thing that happened here, that these things got together, like something getting uncovered and recovered. The fact is, if it is a true story, it's the exception and not the rule. And the last one, the last argument against evolution is the Piltdown Man. We know that the Piltdown Man was fake, so how do we know that any of the other fossils are real? Well, how do we know the Piltdown Man was fake? We studied it, we examined it. Well, guess what? We studied and examined all the other bones, and they're real. It's kind of selective if you say, oh, I don't believe the scientist when he says all those other bones are real, but I do believe him when he says that one's a fake. I mean, this wasn't even something that we took that I mean, it went against, the Piltdown Man went against what was standard for evolutionary theory. It seemed to suggest a completely radically different evolutionary process. And then upon inspection we went, oh, this isn't real. Again, it's the same thing as people, as I was talking about earlier, people who fake astrology. Like, oh, well, if one guy can fake it, it must be all fake. No, it just means that one's fake. And that concludes the arguments against evolution. Next episode we will get back to the other hat and counterpoints on the existence or non-existence of God specifically.